Good afternoon, Mr. Konieczny. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Good.
Outstanding. So we're just going to jump right into this. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for joining. Today we are fortunate to have as our guest Frank Konieczny, Chief Technology Officer for the Air Force. Mr. Konieczny has served in this capacity for about 10 years with the primary duty of advancing the information technology landscape for the Air Force. In this capacity, he's a key contributor to the Air Force's strategy on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and 5G, all of which are topics I'm sure everybody's interested in hearing about today. At the conclusion of this talk, Mr. Konieczny will field questions. Please use the question and answer function of GoToWebinar, and we will answer them at the end of his talk in the order that they were received. So apologize for just jumping right into this. We did have some technical difficulties. So I will turn it over to you now, Mr. Konieczny.
Like normal, we always have technical difficulties when we start off.
Yeah.
I'm glad we cleared up some of them.
Exactly.
All right. Let me tell you what's going on. Basically, what we've been, since COVID hit, this has been a new normal activity that the concern has been now, how can I provide services to the Air Force while they're working at home? So the emphasis, some of the things we were doing before has kind of shifted a little bit into, how can I support the airmen as being more productive and mission focused, especially when they're not on the bases and they're not, at the Pentagon. So there's been a shift, towards that attitude of how we're going to actually do things and what activities we're going to go forward with. And therefore, some of that's going to be, the 5G work, the ICAM work, and some of the other activities that I'm going to talk about that we can have some questions on. First of all of a sudden we're doing remote process automation capabilities now. We decided that, that was one of the major ways of actually going forward with getting mundane things done, especially since we want to have people more focused on mission, given that, we're all teleworking and we won't be back in the bases for a while. In fact, the bases are shutting down even more now than they were before. So we can see that, the shift of COVID is moving everything around for everybody. Okay, so we're doing RPA. We're trying to put out RPA activities across the Air Force, trying to figure out how can we actually modernize, what people are doing in such a way that they can concentrate on mission. Also, we're putting out, 5G. 5G LTE is going to be in all the bases. We've already got 10 bases that are already have the leasing agreement already established for those 10 bases. We have 20 more bases that are going to have a leasing agreement probably signed or at least awarded for December, January. And then there's going to be Alaska, and then there's going to be, we haven't decided yet, but it's probably going to be in the Midwest or the East, which is another 20 or so bases that'll be in the opportunity to lease. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to spread LTE 5G across all the bases and everything else so to make it easier to actually communicate, as well as for quality of life for everybody at the base, and also for mission-oriented activities. And the reason why is because we want to be able to use commercial as an augmentation. And we didn't want to pay for, honestly, didn't want to pay for all the work that we established if we had to do private LTE or private 5G. Now, given that there are some OSD experiments, you say, how is that going to fit in? The OSD experiments are just that. They are experiments. We're trying to figure out exactly how that's going to fit into the environment as well. For instance, at Hill Air Force Base, we're doing spectrum sharing, debatably with the AWACS and some other special radars that we have to share the 5G spectrum with. And so the issue there is, if I have an AWACS radar, can't I actually use the same frequency or some other frequency hops around it to actually do the job without having an infection, in fact, without having the Air Force AWACS be put down for mission activities? And there's other aircraft as well that are involved in this activity, especially when you get to the 3 gigahertz spectrum area. And then we have some other ones. We have the at Nellis is more interesting. This one may be pushed into a development effort as associated with it. And that's basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to take the AOC, Air Operations Center, take all its functions, segment them out, put them into a mobile environment, and move them around in such a way that moving targets are harder to hit than stationaries, and maintain continuity just like you were sitting in the room. So everybody would be moving, optionally moving, at different locations, trying to figure out how to actually link with each other. And they're going to be different things. We're going to use network slicing capabilities for the 5G side, as well as some of the advanced monitoring, capabilities, as well as moving around. So it's going to be an interesting concept that they're also going further with, hand and motion activities as well as speech recognition as to how to do the management and how to communicate with each other. So as we go further down that path, it's going to be interesting. Now, going back to, which is the Tranche 2 experiments for OSD who just came out, you're going to see fairly interesting activities with AR/VR capabilities for flight maintenance, flight activities associated with it, as well as telemedicine. And so we're trying to get to the point where you can actually maintain the aircraft in an AR/VR environment so they can get the parts there fast enough. They can actually do inspections automatically. They can have various predictive and analytics actually performed based on the IoT sensors data that's coming off of the engine, as well as everything else that's an IoT area. So as we look for this 5G piece of it, we're going to go a little bit farther too. At San Antonio, we have the O-RAN capability. That's another experiment. They're supposed to be looking at the security of the O-RAN capability, as well as fielding some of the O-RANs across the various bases, working with DARPA at the same time. And so we're probably going to get to a point where we have private 5G networks at each of the bases, at least at the depots. So they'll be absorbing all the IoT activities associated with that depot and doing the predictive analytics and everything else associated with, maintenance activities, as well as supporting the actual base environment. For instance, we have a SIBR that is actually like this, monitoring steam traps and machinery automatically. And it's interesting, SIBR, because the activity, the device that they attach to the steam trap actually is powered by the steam trap heat itself. So there's no batteries, there's nothing to it. Electricity is generated by that. In the machinery side, electricity is generated by the vibration. And this device is smart enough that it can actually burst information across in a 5G network and accumulate this in particular work areas, so that they could look at dashboards that say something's going wrong or not. And surprisingly enough, I didn't realize we had so many steam traps in the Air Force. There's thousands of them. And we spend people walking around actually looking for leaks in the steam traps. And this will be an automated way of actually doing this. There's another way. Again, it's automating the work so that the airmen can do other things and be concentrated on mission as opposed to anything else. And then we get to the AI ML pieces. Now, I already talked about, how we want to be able to do this for the maintenance activities associated with it. There are several SIBRs and other ways we're looking at this as to how to take the AI ML and train the systems on it, and therefore come back with predictive models. Now, you can't train them at the base level because it's going to be too much data, so there's going to be probably moved to a larger center, if you will, computing center, be a commercial or DoD side, to actually do the training of the models. But when we download the models to the bases, we'll actually use the data from the IoT sensors coming off the planes or wherever in the area to actually do the predictive analysis and determination of what we want to go forward with, as well as the warnings and everything associated with it. So you can see it's kind of a hybrid approach as to how you do this, that the base will have these micro or mini data centers, will be the IoT accumulators, as well as the model running the models for the predictive analysis, and then you have the larger centers for actually doing the training of the models itself. And so, associated with that, we're also looking at quantum capabilities. How can I do quantum key management at one of the bases? And we're probably going to mix that with a 5G system, so we can have quantum key capabilities through a 5G network. Now we're currently doing quantum key management as a SIBR at 2 different bases, linking them together in such a way that we're trying to get to the quantum internet capability that we all wanted to get to at some point in time for security purposes. And let's see what else we're doing. Those are the big ones we're doing. ICAM also. We're coming out with an ICAM solution space that we need to actually do across the Air Force. This is interesting because we needed to do it for zero trust capabilities, at which we're starting to do this now, as to it's being enforced and pushed more than it was before. We had some zero trust research done a while ago, but now it's really a big deal because everybody's working from home again, and we want to make sure that the linkages are established correctly so we can go without any security concerns when we get to the application levels. And let's see what else. But the ICAM is going to be, you know, one of the things we're actually doing ICAM also is for the audit issues. We have an entity-wide audit issue for access control that we have to resolve, and so this is fell right into what we're doing for the zero trust as well. So it's kind of interesting that we get synergy for this one to actually get things done. Likewise, we're, you know, as you probably know, we've done lots of stuff for DevSecOps already. We have 15 software centers, software factories across the Air Force right now. We're pushing that a lot because we want to be able to do that in a way that we are not totally dependent upon any particular integrator to do the job. So these are key particular things, but also we're using DevSecOps in a certain way that the integrators are going to have to use the same capabilities, because that's the way you get ATOs faster. And we do continuous monitoring on top of that. So I think that's, you know, some of the activities we're doing. We're also doing BYOD because, again, we try to get things to the airmen faster. And we have a pilot out there right now which has 100+ users attached to it, and we'll probably be going up to 1,000 pretty quickly to see how that actually works in terms of an environment we have right now. Besides, we have, you know, specialized communication devices. One of them is Wicker, which is a very specialized tool set for security issues of how to link with, usually with agents and everything else, but it's a lot of people have started using it because it's one of those cool things that, you know, you can get your staff together on a phone or whatever in a secure manner without worrying about it. And it's a video plus texting and everything else associated with it. And it has a recognition of who you are on that device as well. And so you can see things are changing basically for IT. Things are going out to, again, support the airmen more than before. We have Digital University for training people. Again, if you are qualified enough, you may actually end up at one of the software factories. But this is a, you know, a big deal for some people. Some people are saying, yeah, that's really great, but I don't really care. So it's it is an opportunity though. So people can actually, you know, develop new skills which they didn't have before or didn't realize they had before, because that's what we found with Kessel Run. We put Kessel Run together way back when. Colonel Odie basically came back and said, okay, let's get some people together that we cross the Air Force and we don't really care, you know, where they're working right now, what their area is, responsibility. We'll just bring them together if they have a coding, you know, intensity or way we're looking at it, and then we got them together and then they actually worked really well. So it's kind of an interesting model. And as we progress farther and farther down the path, you may see more airmen doing things. Now, that's a two-edged sword. The issue is that airmen will be doing things like with the RPA stuff, and the issue becomes then how do you maintain that and sustain that going forward? And so we're trying to battle that one out too. It's nice that everybody could do things. It's a question of how to sustain it when you go forward. Let's see, what else? I think that's about for starting with. Why don't you guys, what questions you guys have? Or can I get deeper into more details?
So the first question that we have is, how do you make sense of all the data coming in? And that's from
Good question. Yeah, you know, depends on the data. Okay. The first of all, it depends on how you look at the data and how you manage the data. I mean, we've always had issues with, you know, data. Let's take the sensor data, for instance. This is interesting because it's where you want to go with the data is most important as to what data is actually coming in. You have to choose the right data. I mean, we've had issues with authoritative data sources, as you probably know, how to get them authoritative, how to make sure that they're complete. One of the issues we've always had was, if you look at the data sources and you say, I'm going to combine them together, how do you know that you're not missing something and there's some differences in the correlations that you're trying to get to? This has been a topic forever, and when we ever have a dashboard that basically shows activities, we ask the question, okay, did you wrangle the data in such a way that you replaced null or wrong elements with something, and what did you do? Or did you cut out half the data because the data didn't have correct values in it? Because all these things do affect your end result. And so how do you handle the data coming in? It's with great care usually. We try to figure out what it is. We try to figure out how to correlate it, which is correct, which is not correct. If it can't be matched with other data sources, that's great. A lot of times, you probably know that when systems were developed, they would take the data from another associated system because that was the one that was closest to it, even though they weren't the authoritative source of the data, because they got it from the authoritative source. And so you got many data sources for the applications that came in like 2 layers away from each other from the authoritative source. And that caused lots of issues, because as we start looking at what is authoritative, you find pieces of data that are authoritative in one system but are not authoritative in another system. And so you got to be careful what data you choose. All the data coming in, like for the IoT sensors, is interesting because there's lots of data. And you got to determine based upon that, what do you want to get out of the data? Is it a predictive analysis method or not? And then do you have enough data? For instance, let's take the simple one with the engine maintenance one. Engine maintenance will tell you that, you pull off information off of the engines and it tells you everything else associated with it. Okay. Do I care where the engine has been, where the aircraft has been? I probably have, but does that come off of the IoT sensors? Is that an associated data source with, where the the flight plan of the plane, as well as anything else associated with it? And you find out that in some cases it's related to the pilot. I know it's hard to believe, but sometimes the pilot, based upon their training, do things with the aircraft which causes stress on the engines. And we found that out for one little squadron that was actually, they were trained a certain way and they were actually using more fuel than everybody else. So it comes an issue as to, how can you actually do all of this stuff as opposed to anything else? So the data is a big source as to what you want to see, but you have to make sure that the data is complete. And I think that's been the problem all along, is how can you say data is complete? How can you say it's authoritative? And that's how you try to make sense of it. But again, this is not an easy little thing to do. I'm telling you, because it's just not a trivial issue.
Great answer. And by the way, that we've got a follow-up question from the same person, which I think you've answered some of, which is, within your control, what project or technologies keep you up at night?
All of them. do I control anything? Is that, that's the first question you have to ask. What am I involved in? Is lots of things. A bit. I think, the problem we always have is that not so much keeping you up at night is that where do you think the next roadblock is going to occur, I think is the real issue. You probably realize that as you go to, as people PCS and change roles and everything else, opinions change as well. And the problem with opinions changing is that you have to bring them back into the forefront and say, guess what, this is what we're doing. I'll tell you, one of the problems we always have is that when officers PCS, they come back into, SAF, and they are, I hate to say this, somewhat clueless as what we do in SAF. And they've never done things like this before. So we have a problem of them coming with great ideas that have been tried several times before, and you have to say, hey, that's a really great idea, but doesn't work. And this is the reason why. And so it's an education issue more than anything else. But I think the real thing that keeps you up at night is, okay, besides the budget, which is always the big deal, you don't know if you're going to have funding or not. It's the changing of opinions as to what you want to go forward with that you haven't heard about yet. Like, let's try zero trust. Zero trust is kind of interesting because zero trust comes out and we're doing a pilot, with DoD. Well, DoD may come and say, hey, I don't like the way you've done zero trust. We all want you to do this. And you're like, well, that's really great, but it's not what we want to do. And so there's an issue with, can you get somebody else to come in across higher than you do anything else? And we have this a lot. I mean, zero trust, ICAM, everybody has ideas about ICAM, about zero trust, about anything really, about, everybody wants to put 5G on their bases. Okay, I can grasp that. However, it takes a while to do that. And so you have to temper the enthusiasm of getting 5G out there with the reality that it takes, a significant amount of time to actually lay the fiber and everything else associated with it. So for instance, after a lease is signed, it may take 3 months to 6 months to actually put something there, if you're lucky. If COVID doesn't hit, like we did, we had everything planned and, it's been delayed for 8 months, so it's not trivial, but I think you have to understand there's going to be lots of changes as you do anything, and you have to relate and correspond to those changes and recover in a certain way. And a lot of it's, telling people explaining to them what happened in the past and why this course of action is the real course of action to take and everything else. But then again, you always get stuck with the budgeting issue. And that's not going to go away. So anything you do is always subject to a budgeting issue.
Thank you for that perspective. So this next question, I'm not sure you can answer or not, but it's how do you partner with the PEOs at Hanscom? And I see a few people from the PEO organization that probably would not necessarily want to be unmuted and put on the spot with that, but I'll let you take a swing at it.
We would like the PEO better at Hanscom. The problem with the problem with being in SAF is that we're in SAF, and there's a I mean, normally, what we try to do is the PEOs are pretty big associated with it. I mean, I used to attend, PEO meetings like ages ago, and probably we should start doing that again as to, because technology infusion, everything else associated with it. However, I think that, the CIO staff have kind of drifted away from actually attending the PEO meetings as opposed to trying to do policy and some governance issues. And I think the PEOs probably don't like us governing them. I mean, I wouldn't either, but it's not so much governance, it's to say, hey, this is happening out there. Do you know about this, and what can we do to actually support you more than anything else? And I think we need to get better on that front, as opposed to saying, I understand what you're doing, but, I don't really care, because we do care what the PEOs do. And the PEOs influence lots of things that we come out with. And so it's an issue of how to better communicate back and forth what's going on, besides saying, we get busy with the secretary and everything else, congressional inquiries, and it never ends. So I think there has to be a better forum where we can actually share, what the PEOs are doing, what we think is going to be the driving force going forward for technology, and how to best incorporate those into the PEO structures and things going forward. And I know nobody wants them out of contract, but sometimes you got to think about, what do I need to do to understand, what is going to come up next, and we may have to have some changes accordingly to it.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And then final question, and this one's a little bit of a hand grenade. Is there an estimated time frame for Cloud One on SIPR?
Supposedly, well, this is it's not us that's stopping Cloud One on SIPR. Okay, let's just put it that way. The SIPR side is basically the cross-domain solution issue is still out there. It's not that, it's that, DISA has to, or DISA has to approve the cloud domain push for the Cloud One for a SIPR side, and that's what's been stuck so far. But I mean, we're doing some stuff with an IL6 right now from the ISR side. And so we're actually working with them right now to get things done. Some of the data stuff is on that side already. So it's not that we are not working in that and trying to get it done, but the stoppage point has been the cross-domain issues and how to connect to the particular cloud. And I think that should be resolved. It's supposed to be resolved months and months ago, to be honest. It just hasn't been done. And I don't think it's a priority right now for DoD, because DoD is spending a significant amount of time right now trying to figure out how to move all the components to Office 365 and bring in some CVR capability at some point in time. And I think that's taking all their attention as opposed to anything else. And we know we have to go IL6. We have things in IL6 that have to be done already. So it's just a question of getting there.
Okay. I'm just looking, there's a couple of questions. It looks like this one came across on the chat window, not on the question and answer, but there's a question which is, how are you tied into Air Force digital engineering efforts?
Okay, the question is, what is meant by digital engineering efforts? Is it excuse me. Is it the idea that I can digitally engineer an airplane accordingly, and I can actually do the models that way, and I can generate parts and everything else from the digital engineering? Is that what's meant? Because I tell you, we were doing this multiple years ago. So it's in commercial land. I mean, it was not in DoD land. So it's digital engineering has been around for a while. It's surprising that it's surprising that we come out and said it's a new technology. I mean, it has some, it's easier now because of the computing capability that's associated with it. But the question is, can you build a plane and actually do the simulation modeling associated with it to actually determine if it will fly given the constraints that you have in your digital engineering work? I mean, multiple years ago, I did a project where basically we had the platforms like aircraft and ships and tanks and everything else, and we attached different components to that to actually see if the electrical plus the propulsion as well as the reaction from the particular weapon that was attached to it could actually be mounted and actually be effective on a particular tank effort. That's a piece of digital engineering that we started with. It was multiple years ago is how to do this. The problem was the processing capability and the granularity of the simulations that you have to do the effects of putting something together. This is the issue that we have right now, is that most of the airplane manufacturers probably have this system well intact in place that they don't want to share with anybody because it's a major discriminator of how they do this. So digital engineering is interesting, but it's something that's been done and it's been more effective right now because of the processing capabilities. We also can actually generate parts with 3D printers to a certain degree, depending on the stressors that's required for those parts. We still haven't got to the point yet where we can actually do real stressful parts production with a 3D printer, but that's where we want to get to. And in fact, each of the depots is working on different materials for 3D printing for various issues that they have themselves. And so as we progress down the path, we can probably build an aircraft just like everything else. The question is who's going to actually fly it and test it. And you got to remember, you still have to build it. You can design it all you like, you run the simulations and the models and everything else, and you have to run them in a great deal of detail because of the way that aircraft actually work and fly, and various through the weather and everything else associated with it has to be done. So the models are there. It's just a question of then you have to build it and you have to have something that can manufacture it and actually make it work.
Gotcha. So we're out of questions from the audience, but I'm going to throw one out there myself.
Okay.
I've taken a look at the attendees, and there are just all aspects of industry on this call right now. And the question I would have is, where is the one area where you need the most help from industry right now? If you could throw it out there and say, here's the one problem that I'm having the biggest issue solving, what would that be, and how can we help you?
That's a hard one. You give me hard questions, you know that. Let's see. I guess it would have to be probably zero trust. Now, and I'm going to tell you why. Zero trust is a term that everybody throws around and doesn't really appreciate what it means and what it means to actually put things in a zero trust environment or a zero trust application. So I think if we would actually say to industry, okay, I have 1,000 apps, which we do, we have more than that. What would it take to put them into a zero trust capability? And the answer comes back with, gee, I didn't know you had 1,000 apps, because it depends on what you look at it. If I'm trying to do zero trust, I'm trying to do it from the base, the person on the base, as well as the person at home. And so how do I can easily do this with 1,000 apps or 2,000 apps as the case may be? And those 2,000 apps are not in the same spot. Let's just say that much. Those 2,000 apps are spread across the world because some of them are existing in bases right now and some of them are not existing in bases. Some of them are, in the commercial cloud. Some will eventually be in the DISA cloud or the JEDI cloud or someplace else associated with it. And then we got, that mess. And I think, zero trust is an interesting concept, and we played with it for multiple years when we were trying to do access control capabilities just using normal communications and everything else associated with it. And convincing people that they can actually do this and there's trust associated with it is going to be interesting. And if you can apply that in terms of the 5G infrastructure, it'd be more interesting because as we get to 5G, we're talking about doing network slicing. And if we do a network slice, can we do zero trust on that network slice as opposed to anything else associated with it? And so you're getting into a different environment of people attaching to a application, you're going to get, non-person entities attaching to applications as well. And how does zero trust play into that kind of environment, especially when it's sitting on another box? So I'm already zero trust is mainly, my user connecting to an application. Well, I also have non-person entities connecting to applications as well, and how can I ensure that to a certain degree and level? I think that would be interesting concept, especially securing both sides.
Great answer. All right, sir. Well, we are out of questions right now. I know we're only about halfway through the hour, but just wanted to open it up again. Sorry.
Come on, everybody. Don't be shy. I can't see your faces, so I can't yell at you. If you're in a meeting room, it'd be totally different,
Might you be seeing my question? Andre LeBlanc. So Andrea LeBlanc, no, I did not see your question. I'm not sure where you've entered it. So if
okay, I got it. Andrea said, is a question. I wonder which Air Force Acquisition Office is designated for which areas, AI, ML, 3D printing. And there isn't one. That's Andrea. This is okay. We have the JAIC, which is AI center per se for ML, and we have Afworks, which has an AI CFT, which is actually running some of the AI experiments that we run with MIT. However, you have to realize that AI ML is really a enabling activity that you can see in multiple places, which is kind of interesting, but that's what it's trying to be. And so when you talk to people about AI ML, it's not a single office per se. I mean, we can go to Afworks and get them to actually support some of the efforts that we're doing. However, what we're finding that when we did the SIBRs, that we have bunches of we're using AI and ML in like 3 or 4 of my SIBRs right now, and it's a question of actually doing the modeling and associated with it to see that. So it's not an office per se; it's enabling technology. Now, people like to say, "Oh, I have the JAIC, and the JAIC does wonderful things." Well, the JAIC does particular mission activities, and you have to bring in that particular mission person to actually support it. For instance, we have a SIBR with a quantum computing company that's actually working with the Weather Bureau to actually do support AI ML weather forecasting using the quantum computer as a piece of that. Okay, who's the office? Well, it's a SIBR. I'm the office, I guess. But I mean, the Afworks does know about it. I mean, we're talking with them about it, and they're happy that we're actually doing that. But there is no per se office. Afworks is probably the closest we have to a center for AI ML capabilities that can actually be utilized, or you can utilize it because we have a accelerator with MIT to actually support this. Now, the printers is something else. This is a hard one because no one talks. I mean, you think it'd be like A4, which does supply and everything else, but nobody's actually grabbed it per se and said, we need to have an office for 3D printing. The depots are doing that because they need to have the spare parts and they need to do things. So it goes back to, I don't know who would actually go back to, except the depots are managing the entities associated with that. Now, there's probably some other people out there somewhere that actually is doing this as well, because I know that particular healthcare and everything else, people like to take 3D models of hearts and things and actually see what's going on, and that's easier to do that. So maybe as part of our telemedicine experiment, we actually may do something like that. We haven't thought about that before, but I have to go and talk to them about that. But I don't think there's any particular office that's in charge of that per se.
Okay, you've challenged the crowd, and now the questions are coming in fast and furious. So this one's very interesting, which is, what do you think of Dr. Roper bending the spoon - red pill? So anybody who's seen The Matrix knows that you first have to understand that there is no spoon.
Yes.
But I'll let you try and answer one as best you can.
No, I appreciate Dr. Roper for doing things that are totally out of whack for standard people in the Air Force. I mean, this innovative work works well. However, you got to be careful of revolutionizing things as opposed to evolutionizing things. And so I think he's on a path for revolution, which is fine because we've been trying to do that for a while. However, it depends on success, I think, and that's where the issue is going to come back to. I mean, he has the vision. The question is, can anybody else, develop things against that vision? And he pushes hard, which is great. I mean, we do appreciate that. I mean, Afworks and everything else associated with it, and it's actually working well in certain areas. But again, it's a good idea that you're going to have to fail fast and do things that are out of the ordinary, and that's fine. That's the way that we kept on saying we would have to go, and finally we're doing that now.
Great answer. Can Mr. Konieczny address how the DoD services are collaborating or not in modernization activities? Are the services borrowing from one another's development work, initiatives, etc.?
Yes and no. I'm sure you like that answer. We all look at what everybody else is doing, and we may not borrow it or we may change it. So I don't think that we would grab something, wholesale and say this is going to be ours now. But I mean, we're all doing different things in IT modernization activities. I talk to the CTOs of the other components on a monthly basis to actually see what they're doing, what they're up to. So we try to share to a certain degree, but it's a question of you start a program. I mean, you have to realize, everybody starts their program and they have to palm 2 years out, 2+ years out, and it's a question of I had the program, but I didn't understand what these guys were doing, in like the Army. Maybe I can change what I'm doing and take what the Army is doing and then modify my system later. So I don't think we're buying things per se. We're looking at capabilities that can be bought via like a GSA contract or something that could be we could buy quickly. And I think that's where some of the sharing is going to start occurring when we say, okay, you have that capability, you got it via GSA, maybe we should get the same capability or modify it slightly. I think that's where you're going to see some of the sharing occurring. But we all talk to each other, so it's not like we don't talk. It's a question of one goes one way, one goes another way. I mean, it's just, and you just have to understand that there's advantages and disadvantages either way.
Understood. So next one, you talked about 5G. Can you talk about the current status and schedule for the Air Force production Itas contracts or risk reduction effort?
It's a risk reduction effort, guys. It's supposed to end in the year, and then you have to make the determination based upon the risk reduction. What do you want to go on contract for, or what do you want to go forward to? The 5G effort there's a piece of a 5G effort, and remember, 5G effort for Itas is for mission. It is not for quality of life across the base. You have to understand that. There's two different ways of looking at this. And we've had that discussion already, that when we release an opportunity to lease, for 20 bases, it's for quality of life plus mission augmentation. If Itas comes across from its bases, and they are, same thing, they want to put 5G for mission activities. And so we're saying that's really great. We can both coexist with each other, and eventually some capability has to be acquired via Itas or something else to push it out there if they're going to sustain that or not. It's a question of sustainment. I mean, and to be honest, it's going to be basically, okay, how much do I pay and how often do I pay for it? If I'm using, a commercial service and I can effectively utilize that from my 5G capability to communicate with other bases, I may do that, as opposed to having a dedicated Itas 5G capability that I'm paying for totally all the time. So it's a question of, economics and utilization of the capabilities. For instance, when we talk about, a private 5G network on the depots to accumulate all of the IoT sensor data and everything else, it's going to be private. We're going to have to fund it ourselves. And we realize that, because that's not quality of life, that's pure mission. And it's a dedicated mission too. So it goes back and forth as to what do you really want to do and how you want to pay for it. And that's what it's going to come down to.
Okay, now this is a follow-on question from Andrea LeBlanc, which is, She wonders if you could elaborate on SSF Cloud One, which base acquisition office, and thank you. So, Andrea, I'm not really sure I get the gist of that. Maybe you do, Mr. Konieczny.
Which office runs Cloud One? It's PEOC3INN.
Okay. With the future of connected Air Force maintenance, are you looking at some of the legacy logistics like CAMS, IMDS, CAMS D-FM, et cetera, and that may need more modernization to include greater security, less mainframes, more cloud?
Yes, and it's a question of how much you want to go and do this. I mean, we've talked about one of the first pilots that was doing an aircraft maintenance was how can I connect to the legacy systems with the new front end, as opposed to changing the legacy systems. I mean, we're going to see some of that. You're going to see some modernization of those legacy systems pushed into, a cloud structure for more resiliency and security as well. So you're going to see a mix of both of those as we progress down further and further. And it's just a question of, timing and funding associated with that. But I think you're going to see that people are going to say the return on investment is going to be worth, going forward with the modernization. Some of those are scheduled for modernization already. It's just a question of when and how we can actually integrate them into, some of the other AI/ML programs that we have for predictive maintenance activities.
Okay, thank you. What is the path to connect multiple levels of security data in airborne links to the cloud?
This is something that A26 came up with, or A2 came up with multiple years ago. That's how you would actually do that, and that's a detailed question that we haven't quite answered yet. But okay, if you think of it this way, I mean, this was called Combat Cloud way back when. The concept basically is that I want to be able to share data at various places and multiple classification levels. And how am I going to actually do this? And first of all, you have to know the data is tagged for that particular classification level, or you get down to a level where you say, I'm going to have a piece of that data tagged differently for different classification levels. This is simply the same thing we have all over the place. The question is, how can you communicate that accordingly? And you have to have a set of guards and everything else that interpret that information. We basically said maybe you should use AML to actually look at data per se, and then figure out what kind of guards you want to pump it through. I mean, knowing that the guards have to change because of the way that it's communicated. Now you can do some communication back and forth, or you can roll everything up and say, I'm in combat and I don't really care about the classification level of it. I mean, that came out multiple years ago, that if you're in combat, you want the data, you can get the data no matter what the classification level is, because the data is destructible, if you will. It doesn't have a long shelf life. It's there for the moment, and then after that, it's no good. So you got to think of it in terms of how that would actually be effective and everything else. So if you have two viewpoints. The viewpoint is I'm going to tag everything, and I'm going to be able to actually spread data across accordingly based on the tags and keep that straight somehow through some AI/ML management and consolidation efforts, as well as some very specialized guards. Or I'm going to say in this data is going to be expendable, and it's going to go, it has a shelf life of 1 hour, and that's it, and I'm going to actually release it to everybody because I don't care about it anymore. So think of it that way, because data is just that. I mean, if after an hour the data is stale, and it doesn't mean you have any meaning anymore, because nothing's there. So it's two viewpoints.
Okay, next one. What is the Secretary of the Air Force CTO's view on their role in bringing cloud into and across the Air Force?
We've had cloud in the Air Force for a while, right? You just don't realize that. We've had virtualized data centers a long time. We've had multiple virtualized data centers. In fact, some data centers have multiple applications. One instance has like 200-300 applications associated with it. So at the base level, we've had virtualized data centers in a long time. The question is really, how do you maintain these virtualized data centers and change them into more modern configurations than we have already? And that's going to be a question that we're going to have to ask the MAJCOMs as they determine, what critical applications have to exist at the base level as opposed to moving everything to the enterprise cloud level. This has been a discussion issue we've had for at least 5 years already, as to how we would actually push that. I mean, people believe, well, wait, a long time ago it was like, it was like corporate's going to provide a cloud for every base. And it was like, hey, that's really great, but corporate can't afford that. And so it was an issue of, well, what applications do you actually need on the base? Or which can you move to the enterprise cloud? And I think we're going to go back to that discussion again in terms of the affordability of the base from the MatchCom level to actually maintain those applications and have that cloud infrastructure. And the modernization of that cloud infrastructure is going to be important as we go forward for resiliency issues. So given that criteria, I think you're going to see a change that basically says, here's a capability, you could buy it, MatchCom. If you don't want to buy it, that's okay too, but you're responsible for your applications at your bases and your mission related activities associated with it.
Great. Okay, here's a tough one. Do you think Afworks provides value to the acquisition process?
Yes, and difficultly, but yes. Afworks is very interesting to work with. We have, I think, we have like 10 SIBRs running concurrently right now, and probably getting more. Afworks does help. The problem, I believe, that Afworks has changed. Let's just put it that way. They've gotten more mission oriented than they were initially. Initially, it was more like I have new technologies, I'm going to utilize it. Now it's been pushed down to a more mission oriented viewpoint of it, because for a phase 2 SIBR, we have to have a end user that's willing to sign up that says they support it and it'll actually work with the SIBR to actually go forward with it. I think that's been the problem before, and I think they finally corrected that, because you get some great ideas, and the great idea fairies out there and they take money and, they'll work, but they have no application, in the Air Force, whatever. So as Afworks works for dual use applications, commercial and as well as military, the issue becomes you usually have to have a military sponsor that actually will work with the vendor at the base to actually get things done. I think that's what's the essential piece that they finally gotten to, and I think that works better. Initially, we got a SIBR that did not have a base sponsor, which was kind of rough because it was a tool set. And so it was like, it's going to end up in platform 1, don't worry about it. And it was like, well, I'm not sure about that, and there's some difficulties with getting, tool sets approved and everything else that wasn't in their SIBR contract. And so they finished correctly, except that they did not have, in their contract, there was no provisions for actually getting them into an ATO situation, of which I make sure every SIBR we do now has that situation. It has that clause in it that they have to do that. And so they're trying to, go forward and trying to get that done now. It's more time for them as opposed to, when they're part of the phase 2 effort. I mean, phase 3 does give them authority to go and be bought by other people. And so that's fine, because they've gone through the vetting process and they have a user that says that's really good and they completed everything successfully. So I think that piece of the contract works well. I do not know for the sustainment piece, when they get to phase 3, what the after effect was, nor the metrics associated with that. I know one SIBR we have right now has been pushed forward, and it's going to have, everybody wants to buy it already. So it's not a question of that one actually being bought. It's some of the questions of the other ones who have more nebulous tool sets associated with it.
Gotcha. All right, this is a good one. As technology changes so rapidly, and the POMing is 2 years out, the Air Force might be buying old technology. What solution would you offer to
that? We proposed lots of things, mainly giving us funding that's not associated with the POM and sort of way of changing the POM. This is the way the government works, unfortunately. This is something that you just can't predict per se. I mean, we keep on saying, we put out this contract and, a year later, it's totally obsolete. There's no way of changing the contract unless you write a contract in such a way that you inject new technology in it, but then it's a cost plus contract and everything else associated with it. We know the problems with that. I don't think there's an easy way for the government to realize that. I mean, we need funding issues. We wanted to have colorless money for a while, and I think we can get some of that now. because, this issue became, for DevSecOps, is that development or is that sustainment? Two different colors of money. So it's messy as to when we start talking about using the old technologies, where we build airplanes, as to, software development. It doesn't quite correlate. Likewise with the tool sets. How do you buy a new tool set into something? Unless you buy it, unless you have a contract that says I'm going to actually infuse tool sets or new capabilities into that contract as a contract claim or something else. And so I think that we have to change our viewpoint as to what a contract has to be and how to actually manage that kind of a contract. And that's difficult. It's very difficult for the acquisition people. And I'm talking for you guys out there that, a lot of times, the requirement is not X, Y, Z. The requirement is, I don't know what it is going to be, but it's going to look something like X or Y or Z, and we'll find out, within a year. And my COTR is going to tell me what I'm going to have to do next. That's a nebulous ever contract. And a lot of people don't like that because you can't evaluate that nor come across with, a payment that says you actually completed something. And I think we're just going to have to get more of those. The OTAs are kind of like that. However, they still have some issues with, how to bring new technology in. I think we're going to have to figure out some way of contracting that in a way that makes sense to everybody. And then maybe just part of your contract, and you can figure out how to incentivize to actually support that as well, which is going to be another issue we always have.
And I'm going to throw another tough one your way that's of my own devising. I know that my own organization is spending a tremendous amount of money on FedRAMP certification at this point, trying to get to IL5 and IL6 beyond that. And it's going to take time. And my concern is, as an Air Force veteran, that trying to get some of the cutting edge technology into your hands through the cloud is delayed by that certification process and the massive requirements in front of it. Do you see a point to where, the Air Force will ever, or the Department of Defense, I should say, will ever relax those restrictions a little bit to make it easier for you to consume products and services delivered through the cloud?
I think it's how you want to come back to it. Okay, we've always talked about using an RMF. If I want to bring something in, I could do an RMF and do the evaluation and achieve that result. However, FedRAMP says I'm moving into another cloud environment and everything else associated with it. For instance, because it's an issue of what security controls and what NIST controls I'm going to inherit from that structure. If I could put a system that's sitting onto a cloud that's already been approved, that has those NIST controls established, it's easier for me to get an RMF for that than anything else, because I'm just evaluating something beyond the controls that are already in the cloud. If you have your own cloud structure, we have to get those NIST controls out. And that's a little bit more complex because you have to get FedRAMP certification, and then for DISALAN, the PATO. So it's a question of inheritance for your RMF as opposed to, anything else. And that's why when I talk to people, I say, hey, can you put it on any of the cloud structures that we have already that's been certified, because then you can inherit all the controls, and then I don't have to worry about you coming up with a whole set of new controls that you have to do something with, or we have to evaluate that with FedRAMP. See, and then that's where I think the rub is occurring. That it's a business decision issue. Let's put it that way. You may go out and say, I want to set up my own cloud and I'm going to do this, or I'm going to have the controls. I'm going to somehow establish the controls, but it's a really difficult way to get through, certification for the cloud structures right now for DoD. Let's put it that way. I guess for everybody else too, because you have to do FedRAMP at least medium for most of the other agencies.
Yeah. Okay, so final question is a follow-up from Mark L., who originally said, what is the Secretary of the Air Force CTO's role on bringing cloud to and across the Air Force? And he clarified that by saying, in bringing, he should have said, in bringing commercial cloud is an enterprise solution. So what's your role in bringing commercial cloud as an enterprise solution?
We don't care. Okay, if I all right, remember, what we're trying to do is get to the point where airmen are not doing any of that. the mission of the Air Force is not to maintain a cloud infrastructure. Let's just say that flat out. Okay. If we put in, okay, let's hypothetically say this. Okay. If we say, okay, I want to put in a service catalog that says cloud architecture bought, and this is what it costs in my catalog. We don't care if it's commercially operated or not. I mean, it's true. It's just that it hasn't been put out that way. I mean, and so we've talked about modernization and everything else, and that we want to be able to use commercial capabilities more than we want to do anything else ourselves. The other issue that you have to understand is security associated with those applications and everything else that we have to maintain, as well as the 16th Air Force has to do their hunting and their incident analysis and everything else associated with it. But I think, that can be overcome because we basically do that right now with the commercial clouds. So if you can bring a commercial cloud to a base, I think it's fine. The question is what vehicle are you going to use to do that? And then what cost factors are going to be established to actually support that? We've talked about it before. Again, it comes out to the procurement issues that you have. And I mean, we tried this a long time ago, except that when AFCEA was the lead command, they couldn't come out with a procurement that actually said that. They came up with a procurement that said, I want this hardware. And that's not what we initially wanted. We wanted a COCO system, not a GOCO system. I mean, so it's understanding that and the ramifications of that to make sure that we get the security envelope and the relationships between the 16th Air Force and other security professionals in the mix as well for that procurement.
Great answer. All right, sir. Well, I want to be respectful of yours and everybody else's time, and we are at the top of the hour. Do appreciate beyond words your participation today. Thank you so much on behalf of AFCEA and everybody here. And with that, I think we will wrap it up.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. It's been fun. Let's do it again.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.